Hi everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our Chatbot series. Today, I'll be showing you how to build a Shiny app that functions somewhat like a chat interface so that you can use the chat function we built in the first video. I'll also be showing you some helper functions that we need that'll make our life easier building this Shiny app. I hope you enjoy. Let's get started. I want to begin by showing you our end product for today's video, which is this chat interface that we have. We can ask a simple question like, what is 2 plus 2? And send this off. With any luck, we'll get a response. There we have it. 2 plus 2 equals 4. So not a particularly impressive use of the GPT 3.5 Turbo capabilities, but at least we have a functioning app. There's some other features here. We can select a different model. We can also change the task. Let's just ask another question to make sure this works. And I'll keep it simple again, and we'll just say, what is the capital of France? Again, a very simple question. Okay, looks like we have both a history that's being shown here, as well as the answers are coming in as expected with different models and different prompts that we have as well. I'm going to jump over to some information about the changes that I've made to our chat function since our last video. Here is an abbreviated version. I've taken out most of the stuff, most of the components of this function that were there before. I've added a history feature, more on that in a moment. Also a system prompt. If you're new to working with OpenAI models, this is a way to guide the model response by giving it some instructions. This can be something like, you are a useful agent, or maybe you're helping me, who's an R programmer. There's a lot of focus now on things like prompt engineering, so a lot of information and effort goes into crafting these prompts. We're not aiming for perfection today, but I do want to show you that we can include those. I've also included the API key as a function input, whereas before it was just within the function body. We've also, to help ourselves construct the prompt, there's 2 helper functions that I've written. But the first is get system prompt, and the second is prepare prompt. The prepare prompt takes the input from the user that we're calling our user message, the system prompt, which will be the output of get system prompt, as well as the history. The get system prompt function is relatively straightforward. We're swapping to either a general system prompt or a code specific one. Now, I've abbreviated this just so that you can see the full code on the slide. But of course, if you look at the GitHub repo, where I'll be sharing links to the code today, you can see the full prompt that I'm using. The second function is prepare prompt. This takes the user message, the system prompt, so the output from get system prompt, as well as the history. The structure here would be a little bit confusing. Maybe in a subsequent video I can show you some more error handling and some more user-friendly approaches to handle these functions, but these work, and so these are close to the simplest version of these that we could imagine. So this is a nice starting point that we can then continue to build upon. One thing I should also note here that can be frustrating, that JSON structure of these nested lists can be a little bit confusing if you're new to working with JSON. Again, these functions should work well for you if you're trying to follow along with me. And honestly, this is something that largely comes with practice, and could serve you well because some of the other popular large language model APIs are likely to take a similar approach. At least they're likely to use JSON as a structure for passing data to the API. Okay, so now let's actually go and move over to start writing the app code for our Shiny app. All right, so I've opened up the project where we started from in the last video. I've created an app.r file that's inside a Chatbot folder inside this project. This is where we'll put the Shiny app. I also have a helper function or helper.r file that contains the functions I was showing you via the slides a moment ago. To get started, we will load in the libraries that we plan to use today. So of course, we're building a Shiny app, so we need the Shiny library. We'll need bslib. I really like this library for making my Shiny apps look nice and professional. We will also need the HTTR2 package to make the API calls. And there'll be a few others that will load, but I'll wait to add them here until we actually need them. Helper.r. There we go. Okay, so you are probably quite used to the general structure. Actually, let me just pull this up. Shiny app. Here we go. That was using a snippet to go ahead and populate this for us. So we have the structure of the loading the Shiny library, a UI server, and then this Shiny app. With the inputs being UI and server. So these are the core components, the minimal components of a Shiny app. Now nothing would show up here because we haven't added anything to them, but here's enough for us to get started. So I'll remove some of the redundant code. And instead of fluid page, what I'd like for us to use instead is page sidebar. So this is from the bslib package. It gives us maybe a dashboard type look. Ultimately, of course, we're going to eventually go to the look that you saw on the original or on the app that I demoed at the beginning of this video. So let's give this a title: Chatbot with R and OpenAI. And some of the core components of the page sidebar, of course, are going to be a sidebar. Come back to that in a moment. And we know that we're going to want some sort of text input. Text area input is a good fit for this. We'll give this the name prompt, and I'm not going to give any label. So I don't need to make the naming explicit there. This is a pretty common structure for the Shiny components for an app, of the ID and then the label. And I'm also going to specify a width. Let's say 400 pixels. Okay, missed a comma there. So let's go ahead and actually load this app and see how far we've gotten so far. Something that I would encourage you to do is to say, once you save the file, you might notice that it now has this run app, recognizes it as a Shiny app. I recommend to have this load in the viewer pane and also to run as a background job. Once you've set both of these, you can use either Command-Shift-Enter or Control on a Mac, or Control-Shift-Enter in Windows. Here we go. Pretty minimal so far. We have this sidebar. We have a text box where we can put text. And I should capitalize the R here. There we go. Okay. Now, if we have text input, we certainly need something so that we can submit that text. Action buttons are really good for that. We'll give this the name chat. No label. That should be fairly obvious to users. A nice thing to add, though, is an icon. There's many that you can choose from here. Font Awesome, that you can see as the default library icon, has a large number of free icons that are available to use. I, for submit buttons, like to use one called Paper Plain. And let's give this a width of 75 pixels. And let's see what we have. Okay. That looks pretty good so far. One thing I also will do is the bslib library has a number of, we can apply classes easily to this. So using the bootstrap library, that's what the BS and bslib stands for, is bootstrap. We can do something like button secondary, and we can do this m-2. This gives a little bit of spacing around the button. Okay, the color changed a little bit, not too much, but this can be a nice thing that you can play with on your own to make the overall format be exactly as you might want. Okay, so that's probably enough for the input and the submit button. Now, we also want to populate the sidebar. For the demo, I showed you two different inputs for that. The first was a model selection, so we can use select input for that. We'll just call that model. This one I will give a label to, and we'll give it two different choices. The same ones that we used in the first video, GPT 3.5-turbo and GPT 4. Okay. The other one that we want to add is the task. This will correspond to the system instructions that we provide to the model, and we'll say general and code. All right, so let's see how this is looking so far. I spelled turbo wrong. You probably already noticed that as you were watching along. I'll get rid of that T. And this is looking pretty good from a user interface perspective. Now, I'm actually going to make it so that this sidebar, when it opens up, collapses by default. This allows it so that we don't confuse a user coming to this for the first time of like, okay, what do I need to choose? Let's set reasonable defaults, and then they can explore further after they start using the app. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. We can have this sidebar that pops out. If you click on this little arrow here, one of the nice aspects of BSLib is it's using the Bootstrap is a common, I don't know what you would call it, web design approach, or the elements here are similar to ones I'm sure you've seen. So it allows for an intuitive user experience. So again, one of the nice reasons, or one of the reasons that I like using this package. So let's now jump down to the server section. We still will need to add something to actually display the response to the users, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so I know that I want to have the user input text. I want them to push the button to send off the chat. And that is a nice cue for an observe. Oops, if I can type. And bind event. All right, so we have some sort of observed behavior that we're going to want to have inside of here, and it'll correspond to a bind event. So you might be familiar with the observe event, where you can actually put the input at the beginning of the function. I've been using this bind event for maybe a couple months now, and I find it's a bit more intuitive to use. It's also recommended by the Shiny developers themselves. Okay, so we want to get a response from the API, and we're going to be using our chat function. Now, if we go over to our helper page, we see that there's a couple of functions in here, and I'm going to source this just so that it's in our environment and available to us. So we can start this tab complete. So our user message, we're going to want that to be input prompt. We'll want our history. We don't really have anything for our history yet. Okay, let's come back to that in just a second. I'm going to put this as null for now. And then for system prompt, we're going to want this to be input task. Okay, so that's all of the inputs that we'll need for this. For the history, this is something that's going to be changing every time the user makes an API call. So this is a good use case for a reactive value. So reactive values, mastering Shiny, the book on Shiny written by Hadley Wickham has a nice overview of reactive value. So if this is new to you, I encourage you to go take a look at those. I'll go ahead and create a chat history reactive value, set it to null. And now we have something that we can replace with our history. All right, so I'm just going to make this a bit easier to read, or at least as something that I find easier to read. Okay. So this will allow us to query the API, but we still haven't done anything to show what the actual response is. One other thing is, what behavior do we have right now if the user doesn't provide any input but does click on the button? So the answer to that is we don't have any control over that. So what we can do here is we can add this rec for required. Let's require the input, the prompt input from the user to not equal basically an empty string here. I think that should catch the edge case of that for us. All right. So let's test this out. We're not going to actually see anything printed out to us of what the response is, but let's at least see if we get any errors. Okay, we have to jump over the background jobs. I don't see any obvious errors here. So let's keep going. Now, I would like, of course, to display this output. And we can do this with chat history. And let's keep this relatively simple for now. So let's say render UI, and let's only render the response. I'm going to throw markdown in front of this just to give it a little bit of styling. We can stick this on the bottom here. So the corresponding to UI or render UI is UI output. And we will use the same name that we gave it down below. So chat history. All right, so let's say, tell me about ggplot2. This might take a second. All right. Hopefully, if with any luck, we will actually get some output here. There we go. Okay, quite a verbose response from the model. Lots of details here. So a couple of things. It did not tell me that this was something that was coming from the assistant. So it's unclear maybe what was provided by the user, what's provided by the assistant. So that's something that we could add. The other is that we don't have the prompt from the user. Now it's sticking in this original text box over here, but really we'd like to keep a record of both of those. In other words, we'd like it to actually be a history. To do that, we need a couple of additional components here, so some helper functions. One that I know that we'll need is a function to update our history. Okay. Okay. So basically what we want this to end up being is just a list of the user and assistant responses coming out of the API. And we want this to build upon the list that build upon the history that was coming before it. So one of the ways that we can do that is to concatenate with C some of the lists that we had coming from before. So of course we want to have our history here, and this is going to create, having this list of lists here, this is the structure that the OpenAI API expects in the messages section. So this is the body that we were talking about in the previous video. Actually, I can scroll up here. So right here, this is what's going to be passed again in the messages portion of this. So the nested list structure here, this just allows it to have the form that the API is expecting. Okay, so we know that we want to capture the information provided by the user. Content equals user message. Okay, oh, and I guess it would help to actually have the response in here as well. Okay, so we'll have role equals assistant. Content equals response. Looks pretty good to me. Actually, there is a case here where we want to remove the history if it happens to be null. So the first history that we provide will be null. We can use, we can use the per compact. If I can spell. To remove empty elements within the provided list to it. And this function should actually, oops, I put that at the wrong. Okay, so we're now combining the list with the user message and the response. And let me show you where we will use this. So before we actually build out our history, let's update or build out the message to the user. Let's build our history using the function that we just made. Okay. We will use the update history. Again, we'll be using our history as input. We will use the user provided message, which is called the prompt, and we will use the response. Okay. And then actually, I thought it was okay that we had this, the rendered markdown down here, but instead of just having it once, let's use map of our chat history. And I'll use the new function notation. Hopefully you're familiar with this. Actually, rather than we can just load the per package. I don't need to. And I'm gonna use glue as well to have this tell us the user in addition to, or like the role, to make this even clearer. So what we can do for this is say $$ role, and then we'll say $$ content. So this will go through each element in the list, grab the role, grab the content, and print that or render that. And we'll put markdown in front of that so it looks nice and pretty for us. I think that we're good to go. Let's go ahead and load this. And it's mad about something. Okay, it's saying it doesn't want to stop the Shiny app. I think that might have just been... I'm not sure what was going on with that. Okay, so let's actually get a shorter question this time. I'm going to say, what is 2 + 2? Hopefully we can get a quick response. There we go. So it's saying user, what is 2 + 2? Assistant, 2 + 2 = 4. All right, what is the capital of France? Same one that we did in the demo. All right, and we are pretty close here. This seems to be working well for us. It could be a little bit confusing of what order to read this in. But just going from top to bottom, I guess if this got quite long, maybe this would be a bit cumbersome. But for now, you know, it's getting us the minimum concept of what a chatbot might look like here. So let's go ahead and do the last step here, which is give it something that isn't quite so boring of a theme. Now, themes can be personal and opinionated. So maybe you'll have something that's better, a better idea than mine. I think I'm forgetting the name. Theme. No, BS theme. There's some nice capabilities in there. Theme preview. There we go. BS lib has some. Whoops. Looks like something crashed for us. Let's go ahead and stop this. I don't think we did anything wrong there. I just think it ended up. I'm going to refresh our session. Again, I don't think we did anything wrong. I just think we stressed the session out by asking it to do a lot at once. All right, let's make this a little bit bigger. This is a fantastic ability. All right, I think what we're doing is we're actually maxing out the RAM of this session. This is a little bit constrained in the cloud environment, RStudio cloud environment. You could, of course, pay for more RAM, where this will be a seamless experience for you. Okay. Let's refresh the session. Maybe have a little bit less RAM in there. Yeah, I'm looking at the colors up here. It's not thrilled with us. Okay, there's one other way that we can do this. If you do this locally, I'm betting this will work just great for you. But instead, we can actually just throw bslib. And there we go. If we throw this into our server, when we run the app, it should give us no problem. Oh, come on. Looks like we might have had a hung session there. All right. Okay, let's try this one more time. Nope, doesn't want to do that. Let's run it in our R console, see if that does any better for us. All right, thanks for bearing through those technical difficulties, but those are a normal part of programming. So what we can do here is we can swap between different themes, see what these things look like. You can, of course, play with these on your own. I'm going to jump down to Vapor. That was the one that I showed originally. And this has a nice feature of it can show you exactly what exactly the code that you can copy here. So I'll go ahead and stop that. And there's a theme argument that we can provide here. We'll use BS theme, and boot swatch is going to be Vapor. Okay, so let's get rid of this line of code that we don't need. It looks like it keeps getting mad at me for not appropriately exiting out of my previous sessions. Let's go ahead. Yep, let's terminate R. All right, I don't think we lost anything with that. Okay, this looks pretty good. Pretty close to what we had before for the original demo. Again, we'll say, what is 2 plus 2? All right, and tell me about ggplot in 2 sentences. That should get a little bit of a shorter response than the first time we asked it about that. Okay, there we go. Now, plenty of additional improvements that we could make to this to give it more of a chatbot feel, but this is looking pretty good to me. The last thing I want to check is make sure that we can, in fact, swap out the model and the code like I showed you in the original demo. And let's just say, show me an example, but keep it short. This actually would be a good validation that it's seeing our history, because if it doesn't give us a ggplot example, then it didn't actually understand, then it wasn't using the history. Luckily enough, this looks good to me. It is giving us an answer, and using that markdown that we had before, this is nicely formatted code for us. We could copy this over and test this out if this was new to us and we were learning about ggplot. All right, so I think that pretty much covers the minimal app that we were wanting to build here. So I hope you enjoyed following along with me. I'll post the code onto the project repo that'll be linked in the description below. And thanks for tuning in for part 2. In the next part, I'll show you how to publish this app to share with others, covering not only how to get this on shinyapps.io, Hugging Face, and how you can share your API key via secrets on both of those services. See you on the next one.